What if losing everyone was the beginning of everything? What if the silence wasn't abandonment, but a divine appointment? This is what happened when a man has no one but God. Part 1. The moment of aloneness when everything falls away. There comes a moment in a man's life when everything he once held on to begins to slip through his fingers. The relationships he thought were unshakable begin to dissolve. The job he devoted decades to vanishes. The people he once called friends fade into silence. It is not a fall, it is a collapse. And it's not gradual, it's sudden, violent, and uninvited. This is the moment of absolute aloneness. But for Napoleon Hill, this moment is not an accident. It is an essential phase in the spiritual and psychological evolution of a man. In Think and Grow Rich, Hill hinted that the greatest breakthroughs come right after your darkest nights. He said, "Every adversity, every failure, every heartache carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. The seed, however, only grows in the soil of solitude." When a man has no one but God, he begins to face reality without filters, without distraction. There is no noise, no audience, no applause, and no one to blame. Just raw, unfiltered confrontation with self. And that is precisely the setup the universe seems to require before delivering real inner transformation. The stripping process, losing the illusions. Hill often wrote about the concept of burning desire, but what few realize is that desire must be purified. It has to be separated from ego, fear, and social approval. In the stripping away of worldly attachments, a man is forced to examine what truly drives him. He no longer pursues wealth to impress, love to possess, or power to control. Everything external becomes meaningless. This stage is brutal. It feels like death because, in many ways, it is. It is the death of identity. The ego, the carefully crafted persona a man spent his whole life building, is torn down brick by brick. What remains is uncertainty. And that's terrifying unless you understand the principle Napoleon Hill taught, that the void is not the end. It's the beginning. When Hill lost his own fortune, reputation, and influence early in his journey, he spiraled into depression and isolation. But it was in that isolated space, that wilderness, that he wrote the foundational chapters of Think and Grow Rich. That's no coincidence. It's a pattern. God as the last and only source. In the teachings of Hill, God is often synonymous with infinite intelligence. When no human support remains, when external systems collapse, a man is left with only one option to turn inward and upward. This isn't religious doctrine, it's psychological survival. Napoleon Hill didn't preach theology. He taught alignment with the creative intelligence that governs life. Hill taught that the connection to infinite intelligence can only be accessed through a quiet mind and an unwavering belief in something greater than oneself. It is only when a man is abandoned by society, by people, and by external institutions that his ears become sensitive enough to hear the quiet voice of divine direction. The modern world teaches men to rely on status, influence, or even hustle. But when all of that fades, what remains? Hill believed that the man who has nothing but God is actually the richest, because that man has nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The shift in perspective from victim to vessel. A common mistake in this stage is to view it as punishment. Many men spiral into bitterness, victimhood, or despair, but Hill would argue that this moment is not meant to destroy a man, but to rebirth him. The suffering is not the message, the transformation is. To illustrate this, think of coal. Coal undergoes massive pressure in darkness before it becomes a diamond. The same is true of the man who has no one but God. The pressure isn't incidental, it's divine engineering. Napoleon Hill's own words reflect this beautifully. Out of resistance comes strength. When you resist the urge to escape your solitude, when you sit in the silence long enough, your perception begins to shift. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is trying to emerge from within me?" This is when victimhood ends and leadership begins. facing the inner war. At the heart of this solitude is confrontation, not with enemies outside, but with shadows inside. Hill referred to these as the 6 basic fears: poverty, criticism, ill health, loss of love, old age, and death. These fears lurk in the background when life is good, but in isolation, they come to the front row. This inner war is where a man begins to choose what kind of man he wants to become. He can either be destroyed by his fear of loss or be refined by it. Hill emphasized that fear is nothing more than a state of mind, and states of mind can be controlled, but only by a man who has first faced them in the silence. It is in this solitude that the conscious mind and the subconscious mind begin to wrestle. The conscious mind repeats all the failures, all the betrayals. The subconscious stores the guilt, the wounds, the self-doubt. But something else begins to rise if the man holds his ground in intuitive knowing, in inner wisdom. This is the voice of God, of infinite intelligence. The identity collapse, rebuilding from ground zero. Most men fear losing what they have, but very few realize that losing everything can be the greatest blessing, because only then can they build something truly authentic, not something inherited from parents, not something copied from culture, but a life in alignment with their soul. Napoleon Hill saw this not as failure, but as initiation. In Hill's world, success was never about shortcuts. It was about internal alignment. The man who has no one but God has been stripped of false motivations. Now, the only motivation that remains is purpose. This is the rebuilding phase. But rebuilding doesn't start with money, relationships, or projects. It starts with thoughts. Hill said, "You are the master of your destiny. You can influence, direct, and control your own environment. And that power begins not when you're surrounded by cheerleaders, but when you're utterly alone." Why men are tested through isolation. There's a spiritual principle in Hill's philosophy that the universe tests before it trusts. A man who has not walked alone with God cannot be trusted with influence. Why? Because he still needs validation, because he still fears criticism, because he still serves ego over purpose. Solitude becomes a test. Will you bend? Will you break? Will you beg the world to take you back as you were? Or will you walk forward differently, slowly, painfully, but faithfully? When a man passes this test, his power changes form. It is no longer brute ambition. It is no longer about conquest. It becomes service. Hill believed that every truly successful man eventually arrives at the realization that his work must benefit others or it will destroy him. And that realization only becomes clear in the silence of God. Part 2, faith, the only asset left standing. When a man has lost everything, his job, his status, his relationships, and even his self-confidence, what remains? To the average mind, the answer is nothing. But in the philosophy of Napoleon Hill, what remains is the one thing that can rebuild everything: faith. Faith, in Hill's framework, is not religious sentimentality. It's not a passive hope or blind optimism. It is a psychological force, a mental tool, a spiritual discipline. Hill defined it clearly. Faith is the eternal elixir which gives life, power, and action to the impulse of thought. In other words, it is the invisible catalyst that turns thoughts into outcomes. Faith is not what you say, it's what you do when you're alone. It's easy to talk about faith when things are going well, when checks are coming in, when people support you, when your body is healthy, when your future looks secure. But that's not real faith. That's convenience. The moment when faith is tested, when a man truly has no one but God, is when it reveals its actual strength. You find out whether your beliefs are armor or decoration. Are you wearing them for the world to see, or are you built from them on the inside? Hill believed this internal strength is what separates those who merely wish for success from those who command it through persistent action. Even when everything outside says no, the mind is the battlefield. In the solitude of suffering, The human mind becomes the battlefield between fear and faith. Fear whispers, "You're finished." Faith whispers back, "This is just the beginning." But for faith to win, it must be exercised like a muscle. And Napoleon Hill gives us the formula for this inner exercise in Think and Grow Rich. Faith is a state of mind which may be induced by autosuggestion. This means a man must speak to himself differently. He must reprogram his inner dialogue. Instead of saying, "I'm ruined," he must repeat, "I am being rebuilt." Instead of "No one is coming to save me," he must affirm, "God is guiding me to save myself." Faith is not waiting for rescue. Faith is taking action on intuition before the evidence shows up. And that is the hardest thing a man will ever do. But it's the only thing that sets him free. The science of belief, Hill's core principle. Napoleon Hill was not mystical in the traditional sense, he was methodical. He wanted to break down success into reproducible components. Faith, he argued, was not abstract, it had a formula. Thought, emotion, repetition, belief. Once a belief is embedded into the subconscious mind, it becomes directive. It steers your decisions, your perceptions, and your resilience. When a man has no one but God, he must train his mind like a soldier, repeating affirmations of his strength, of his destiny, and of his divine partnership with infinite intelligence, until it becomes more real than his present pain. This is the essence of Hill's concept of definiteness of purpose combined with faith. When these two collide, miracles aren't just possible, they become probable. Faith does not prevent pain, it gives it purpose. Many confuse faith with comfort, but the truth is, faith doesn't shield you from pain, it simply prevents you from collapsing under it. It gives the pain meaning. When a man is lying on the floor, metaphorically or literally, and everything inside him says to stay down, faith is the whisper that says stand up. One more time, just once more. Faith does not erase the difficulty, it transforms the man facing it. Napoleon Hill described faith as the head chemist of the mind. Why? Because it takes the raw materials of suffering, failure, loss, and transmutes them into power, clarity, and fire. A man who emerges from solitude with faith doesn't just rebuild his life, he reinvents his character. Faith as the bridge between thought and reality. This is perhaps Hill's most radical idea, that faith is the bridge between the invisible and the visible, between the imagined and the achieved. Without faith, desire is just fantasy. With faith, desire becomes creative force. Think of every inventor, artist, or entrepreneur who succeeded against all odds. In the beginning, no one believed in them. They had no audience, no investors, no proof except what they saw in their mind's eye. What sustained them? Faith, not in the world, but in what God had planted within them. Hill would say faith is the element, the chemical which, when mixed with prayer, gives one direct communication with infinite intelligence. When a man has no one but God, this is the line of communication he must open. And he opens it not with words but with belief, followed by action. Acting in faith when the outcome is unknown. Here's the hardest part. Faith demands movement before certainty. A man must take the first step even when the staircase is invisible. This is what separates dreamers from creators. Hill insisted that action is the proof of belief. If you say you have faith, but you don't move, you're lying to yourself. When you apply for the job you don't think you're qualified for, when you speak your vision while still trembling inside, when you invest your last resource into something your soul says yes to, that's faith. And only in these moments does life begin to move in your favor. Hill called this the sixth sense, or the hunch that guides you, but it only activates when you demonstrate trust. You must move as if God is walking with you even when you hear only silence. The reward of faith, strength that cannot be shaken. When a man walks through pain with faith, he gains a kind of strength that no one can take away. It's not based on titles, possessions, or external power. It's internal. It's eternal. Napoleon Hill knew this kind of strength well. He was betrayed by associates, silenced by publishers, and dismissed by critics. But he never surrendered his belief that God's infinite intelligence was guiding his mission. He wrote with conviction because he lived through contradiction. He faced ridicule while preaching success. He endured poverty while studying wealth. And yet, he persisted. That's the testimony of faith. So, when a man has no one but God, he is not cursed, he is being prepared. For what? For leadership, for influence, for impact, but above all, for alignment. Because only a man who walks by faith can teach others to see what's possible beyond fear. Part 3, The Awakening, Communicating with Infinite Intelligence. There comes a moment often in silence, often in tears when a man begins to awaken. This awakening does not come with trumpets or applause. It doesn't look heroic. In fact, it often begins with complete exhaustion, spiritual, mental, emotional. But it's in this exact stillness, when a man has no one left to lean on but God, that he begins to sense something ancient, something eternal, something infinitely intelligent. Napoleon Hill called this infinite intelligence the invisible force that animates all creation and supplies the ideas, inspiration, and answers we need when logic runs out. For Hill, this wasn't just spiritual metaphor. It was a real, practical source of knowledge and guidance. And most men never hear it because their lives are too loud. Stillness is the doorway. When a man is isolated from the world, forced into solitude, the external noise that once drowned out his intuition begins to fade. The opinions of others no longer matter. The expectations of society no longer hold weight. And that's when he finally hears the voice that had been whispering all along. Hill emphasized this infinite intelligence can only be accessed through the subconscious mind, and the subconscious only speaks in stillness, repetition, and deep belief. This is not prayer in the conventional sense. It is deeper. It is a form of communion, a quiet tuning into something beyond words. When a man has nothing left to do but listen, he begins to hear. But what exactly does he hear? He hears vision, he hears ideas, he hears direction, not in loud commands, but in sudden clarity. A name pops into his mind, a step becomes obvious. A message he ignored for years now strikes like thunder. Hill explained this in Think and Grow Rich. Ideas are the beginning points of all fortunes, and they are products of infinite intelligence. That means your breakthrough won't come from your bank account, your resume, or your history. It will come from a moment of divine insight, but only if you're listening. You are not the source, you are the receiver. Most men live under the illusion that they must figure it all out, that they must force, push, and grind their way into success. But Hill dismantled this idea entirely. He believed that the greatest ideas, the ones that create empires, heal trauma, inspire millions, do not originate from the individual. They are received. The man who has no one but God is finally in a position to receive. Why? Because he no longer tries to control everything. He has been emptied of ego, and only an empty vessel can be filled. This is where the shift happens from operating as a self-centered creator to becoming a God-connected channel. The man doesn't stop working, but his work changes. His energy changes. His motives change. Hill said, "There is a difference between wishing for a thing and being ready to receive it." The man in solitude becomes ready not because he deserves more, but because he is now aligned with a source far greater than his intellect. The sixth sense, the mind's divine radar. Napoleon Hill described the sixth sense as the final step in mastering the mind. After desire, faith, autosuggestion, specialized knowledge, imagination, and decision comes the mysterious faculty called intuition, the sixth sense. Most men dismiss this as fantasy, but Hill said it is the most powerful of all faculties. Why? Because it's not learned, it's sensed, and it becomes active only when the rest of the mental house is in order. In isolation, this sense becomes sharper. The man who is no longer distracted by noise begins to see patterns others miss. He anticipates shifts before they happen. He gets warnings in his gut, guidance in his dreams, and wisdom in his stillness. This is not magic. This is divine intelligence made available through surrender. Through the aid of the sixth sense, you will be warned of impending dangers in time to avoid them, and notified of opportunities in time to embrace them. This quote from Hill is not metaphorical. He meant it literally. And the man who has no one but God must begin treating his intuition as a serious, trustworthy tool, not a coincidence. Communion, not control. One of the deepest transformations in this phase is the shift from trying to control life to learning how to commune with life. Most men spend their lives forcing outcomes, but the awakened man, alone with God, begins to sense that his job is not to command reality, but to cooperate with it. Infinite intelligence doesn't respond to control. It responds to clarity, trust, and action. The man must become clear on his purpose, trust the divine insight, and then act even when no one understands. This is how Hill operated. He didn't just sit and visualize wealth. He wrote, published, networked, failed, and tried again. But his action was always rooted in what he called definite chief aim, a purpose given, not invented. And that's the key. The man with no one but God stops chasing dreams fed by ego and starts walking in purpose revealed by stillness. Dreams from God require discipline from you. Receiving insight is only the beginning. The real test is what you do after the insight comes. Hill warned against wishful thinking. He saw too many men hear a beautiful idea in silence, but lack the self-discipline to follow through. Infinite intelligence may give you the map, but it will not walk the path for you. So when the idea strikes, when the vision comes, you must treat it as sacred. Write it down, plan it out. Take the first step, however small. The man who is faithful to the first instruction will be trusted with the next. That is the nature of communication with the divine. It's not a one-time revelation. It is a dialogue ongoing, expanding, deepening with each act of obedience. From awakening to assignment. When a man has no one but God, and he awakens to the reality of infinite intelligence, something powerful shifts. His life is no longer a survival project. It becomes a divine assignment, and that changes everything. He begins to speak differently, not to impress, but to uplift. He walks differently, not in arrogance, but in presence. He no longer begs life for blessings. He begins to become a blessing to others. Hill believed that this is the highest form of success, not riches, but alignment with your higher calling, delivered through spiritual awakening and sustained by discipline. This is not religious dogma, it's universal design, and every great man in history walked this path. Not all of them started wealthy. Not all of them started popular. But all of them started alone. And in that sacred solitude, they listened and were changed forever. Part 4, the power of resolve when there's no way out. There is a sacred kind of strength that only appears when all exits are closed. When a man has no more friends to call, no more money to rely on, no fallback plan, no sympathy, and no escape, something raw and powerful begins to surface resolve. This is not motivation. This is not inspiration. This is a primal inner decision that says, I will not quit. Napoleon Hill called this definiteness of purpose, and he believed it was the cornerstone of all success. When a man has no one but God, he has nothing to lose. And in that condition, he becomes dangerous, not in a violent sense, but in a focused, immovable way. When the world pushes him to the edge and expects him to fall, he digs in, straightens his back, and declares his mission with brutal clarity. Desperation is the soil where definiteness is born. Most men live with vague desires. They kind of want to improve. They hope to succeed, but nothing in them burns with conviction. That's why life never truly moves in their favor. But when a man reaches rock bottom, when the floor caves in, he no longer has the luxury of indecision. He's forced to choose collapse or rise, and if he chooses to rise, it won't be because of comfort, approval, or applause. It will be because of an inner decision so sharp, so unwavering, that the universe itself begins to bend around it. Hill wrote, "Widhaminorn on Tuntirantinu." There is one quality which one must possess to win, and that is definiteness of purpose, the knowledge of what one wants, and a burning desire to possess it. A man with definiteness of purpose is a man who has burned the ships. There's no turning back. He is committed, not merely interested. Pressure creates the diamond of decision. No man becomes great without facing a moment when he wants to quit. The difference between the average and the exceptional lies in the decision made at that breaking point. Napoleon Hill observed this in countless stories. Thomas Edison ran thousands of failed experiments before inventing the light bulb. Henry Ford was ridiculed for attempting to build a gasoline engine. Abraham Lincoln faced crushing defeats, deaths, and public humiliation. But each of them had one trait in common: an unshakable resolve. They had no plan B. That's the gift of isolation. When no one is there to save you, you stop waiting to be saved. You decide to save yourself or die trying. And in that moment of resolve, the mind begins to generate creative power. Hill taught that the subconscious mind responds to clarity and commitment. When a man sets a clear objective and refuses to back down, he triggers ideas, circumstances, and people to move in alignment with that objective, even if he doesn't know how at the beginning. Resolve transforms identity. Most people think of success as something they achieve, but Hill saw it differently. Success is something you become, and you become it the moment you decide who you are without compromise. When a man has no one but God, he must confront this question: who am I now that everything I once used to define myself is gone? And if he's courageous enough to answer honestly, something sacred emerges, identity built not on achievement or acceptance, but on vision and vow. Resolve is when you stop negotiating with weakness. You no longer argue with doubt. You no longer ask for permission. You choose your mission and you honor it, regardless of emotion, fear, or odds. That kind of inner choice changes how a man walks, talks, and thinks. People around him feel it. Reality around him shifts. Why? Because he's no longer a man looking for a way, he's a man creating one. Obstacles test the depth of your decision. Hill emphasized every adversity, every failure, every heartache carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. But here's the catch: only men with resolve plant that seed and nurture it. Obstacles are not signs to stop. They are filters. Life uses them to see how serious you are. Most men hit a wall and retreat, but the man who has resolved deeply, internally, and spiritually will hit the wall, bleed, and look for another way. Or he'll break the wall down. Why? Because his why is stronger than the wall. When a man commits with his whole soul, when he tells God, "Use me," he will be tested. But if he persists, the reward isn't just a goal, it's a transformation of character. And that is worth more than any amount of money or fame. Clarity of purpose attracts divine guidance. God does not bless confusion. He does not pour wisdom into a vessel that hasn't chosen its shape. Napoleon Hill believed that once a man is clear about what he wants, and that clarity is aligned with a deeper calling, not selfish ambition, infinite intelligence begins to cooperate. That's why definiteness of purpose isn't just about strategy, it's spiritual. When your purpose is pure, when your motives are no longer corrupted by ego, when you're willing to walk alone, God begins to send the right people, open the right doors, and close the wrong ones. But none of this begins without decision, Hill said. Indecision is the seedling of fear. The man with no one but God must cut that seedling at the root. He must choose, not half-heartedly, not temporarily. He must choose and keep choosing even when every external result says quit. Resolve requires action, relentless, focused action. It's not enough to make a decision in your mind. You must follow it with action, relentlessly, daily, even if it's imperfect, even if it's small. Hill wrote extensively about the necessity of persistence as the expression of resolve. The man who gets up and tries again after losing everything is the man who cannot be stopped. When a man decides to rise and acts on that decision, something spiritual happens. Heaven leans in, earth responds, and the man becomes unstoppable not because of talent, but because of alignment. In this way, a man with no one but God becomes a man who needs nothing but purpose. And from that purpose, he rebuilds a new life, not one of survival, but one of significance. Part 5, Rebirth from Ashes, the Law of Burning Desire. When a man has nothing left but God, he is standing in the ashes of what once was. His dreams have crumbled. His identity is shattered. His reputation, perhaps, is in ruins. And yet this is precisely where something holy begins to burn, not in the comfort of success, not in the applause of others, but in the middle of destruction, a single spark ignites. And if the man honors it, it becomes the fire of transformation. Napoleon Hill called this sacred fire burning desire. In Think and Grow Rich, he didn't simply mention desire, he built an entire system around it. He stated, "The starting point of all achievement is desire. Keep this constantly in mind. Weak desire brings weak results, just as a small fire makes a small amount of heat." But the kind of desire he meant wasn't casual wanting. It wasn't a wish. It was an obsession, a relentless inner drive so intense it would push a man to rebuild his life, even from the dust. Burning desire begins in desperation but ends in destiny. Most people mistake desire for desperation, but desperation is the fuel. Desire is the flame. Desperation says, "I need to change." Burning desire says, "I will die before I quit." That's the difference. Hill believed that once a man identifies what he truly wants and why it matters at the soul level, his entire psychological system begins to reorient. Thoughts become aligned. Emotions gather in support. Actions become focused. Resistance burns away. This is the man who wakes up early, stays up late, fights through criticism, and keeps moving through the fog of uncertainty, not because it's easy, but because the fire inside won't let him rest. And often, that fire doesn't appear until everything external is gone. From the ashes of loss comes the fire of clarity. When a man loses everything, his job, his relationships, his sense of self, he also loses confusion. There's nothing left to distract him. That's when he starts asking real questions. What do I truly want? Why am I still alive? What is worth rebuilding for? Those questions aren't just intellectual, they are spiritual summons. And if answered with honesty and urgency, they lead to one thing: burning desire with divine clarity. Hill's philosophy teaches us that the moment of greatest clarity often comes in the wreckage of failure. That's not punishment. That's refinement. The fire that burns a man's past is the same fire that lights his future if he dares to harness it. The mechanics of burning desire. According to Hill, burning desire is not random. It is constructed. He gave us a 6-step method to build it. 1. Fix in your mind the exact thing you desire. Be specific. Vagueness kills power. 2. Determine what you are willing to give in return. Nothing is free, not even success. Set a definite date to achieve it. No deadline. No urgency. 4. Create a clear plan and begin immediately, even if not perfect. 5. Write it all down, your statement of desire. Read this aloud twice daily, with belief. This formula is not magic. It's momentum. When followed consistently, it transforms desire into obsession and obsession into action. And in the life of a man who has no one but God, this process becomes sacred. It's no longer just self-help, it's self-resurrection. The power of obsession without distraction. One hidden gift of losing everything is this: you're free from noise. No more pretending. No more people-pleasing. No more juggling 15 conflicting goals. You get to obsess, fully, purely, powerfully. Burning desire requires obsession. That word scares people, but Hill embraced it. Why? Because he knew that every great achievement in history was the result of someone fixated on one outcome. The man with no distractions becomes a weapon of focused intention. He doesn't ask if it's possible. He doesn't beg for permission. He moves with holy purpose. That level of drive isn't natural, it's spiritual, and it burns through fear, laziness, procrastination, and doubt. Why God waits for burning desire before responding. Hill wrote, "No one is ready for a thing until he believes he can acquire it. And belief is born in burning desire. Why? Because when you truly want something so badly it keeps you awake at night, moves you into action, and won't let you go, your belief starts to match your want. That's when the universe begins to respond. Infinite intelligence. Hill taught, does not respond to vague wishes. It responds to clear requests backed by bold pursuit. In other words, God doesn't answer maybe, he answers must. And the man who wants something with his whole soul, who is willing to sacrifice, persist, and evolve, will find himself being led, step by step, toward it. Burning desire purifies you. There is something else Hill didn't say directly, but it's woven into his stories. Burning desire changes the man before it changes his results. It purifies. It burns away weakness. It exposes ego. It humbles. It clarifies. It simplifies. You cannot hold on to victimhood and burning desire at the same time. One must die. And when desire wins, the man who remains is sharper, stronger, and more aligned than ever before. That's why Hill repeatedly said success comes to those who become success conscious. Not those who chase, not those who hope, but those who become through fire. Rebirth is not glamorous, it's grimy, gritty, and God-filled. Most people romanticize transformation, but the real rebirth, the kind Hill went through, and the kind every man must face, looks like suffering first. It looks like crying on the floor. It looks like doubting your sanity. It looks like talking to God in the dark, with no response. But if the man keeps walking, keeps believing, keeps burning with desire, despite what he sees, he doesn't just recover, he rises. And what he builds next is not just success, it is destiny. Because now he knows no matter how much the world takes, it can never take the fire inside. Part 6, Mastering the Mind When Thought Is All You Have Left. When the noise dies down, when the world turns its back, when even your own voice trembles in doubt, what remains is your mind, the final battlefield. In the silence of defeat, when there are no distractions left, the mind becomes either your executioner or your savior. And Napoleon Hill made it clear, you are the master of your fate, you are the captain of your soul, not through willpower alone, but through mental discipline, through the unwavering control of thought. In Hill's world, success is not earned externally, it's first won internally. The mind is either a tool or a tyrant. Most people never train their minds. They allow thoughts to wander, react, spiral, and sabotage. Their internal voice becomes an echo of failure, fear, and regret. But when a man has no one but God, and his environment offers no comfort, his only leverage is the thoughts he chooses to accept. Hill taught that every thought is a seed. What you allow to grow will become the fruit of your life. So if your dominant thoughts are of fear, unworthiness, and hopelessness, your results will match. If your dominant thoughts are of strength, vision, and certainty, so will your outcomes. He said, whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. But the belief part is critical, and belief is a product of repetition, emotion, and focus. You cannot believe what you keep questioning. You cannot master what you don't discipline. Mental discipline is built in isolation. You don't build a disciplined mind at the height of success. You build it in darkness, in solitude, in suffering, when no one is watching. That's where the war really happens. The man who has no one but God must learn to do what most men never will: sit alone with his thoughts and take command. When a negative memory arises, he replaces it. When fear creeps in, he speaks truth back to it. When the temptation to quit whispers, he reaffirms his decision to persist. This is not fake positivity. This is cognitive warfare. And it is the difference between a man who sinks and a man who rises. Hill believed that every single man could train his mind to become an instrument of creation, but most won't, because it takes daily internal labor. No applause, no external reward, just slow, steady rewiring. The power of autosuggestion, your mind's reprogramming system. Napoleon Hill gave us a powerful method to reprogram the mind. Autosuggestion. Autosuggestion is the agency of control through which an individual may voluntarily feed his subconscious mind on thoughts of a creative nature. This means you don't have to be a prisoner of your past. You don't have to live by default. You can install new beliefs, new thoughts, and new outcomes by repeating what you want to become out loud, every day, with emotion and intensity. The man with no one but God doesn't wait for motivation. He creates momentum by programming his subconscious. And as that programming begins to take root, his actions change, his energy changes. Life begins to bend toward his expectations, not because of magic, but because of alignment. Guard your mind like a fortress. Hill warned us the mind will accept any thought repeated often enough. That means you must guard it with your life. Cut out the voices that tell you you're too late. Eliminate the memories that shame you into paralysis. Block the internal monologue that starts with, "I'm not good enough." These are not harmless thoughts. They are invaders, and if left unchecked, they will destroy your future from within. The man who has nothing left must become militant about what he allows into his mental space, because when your external world is gone, your internal world becomes your only home. Make it sacred. What you think about, you become. Napoleon Hill simplified everything into one timeless principle. You become what you think about, not what you hope, not what you intend, what you think about consistently, emotionally, and repeatedly. This means your future is being written right now, not in your bank account, not on your resume, but in your inner dialogue. So what are you thinking? Are you reliving past pain? You're replanting it. Are you focusing on betrayal? You're fueling it. Are you rehearsing failure? You're recreating it. But if you start feeding your mind with a new script, one aligned with faith, vision, and purpose, you begin to shift the soil of your reality, slowly, yes, quietly, at first, but powerfully. The mind, once disciplined, becomes the source of miracles. God works through the disciplined mind. This is the hidden truth in Hill's work. God partners with clarity. You can pray, you can hope, you can plead, but if your mind is chaotic, distracted, and undirected, you won't be able to receive the answer even when it's right in front of you. Hill taught that infinite intelligence flows through defined channels. Your thoughts must be clear. Your beliefs must be firm. Your intention must be rooted. Then and only then does the wisdom come. Then the inspiration strikes. Then the idea clicks. But God won't fight your mental clutter to bless you. You must make room. That's why mental discipline isn't optional. It's sacred preparation. From chaos to command, the mental shift that changes everything. The turning point comes when a man who's broken, lost, and alone decides to think on purpose. It's subtle, no one sees it, but it's revolutionary. He stops reacting and starts choosing. He stops replaying the old story and writes a new one. He stops giving power to fear and transfers it to faith. From that moment on, he's not just surviving, he's sculpting, thought by thought, word by word, identity by identity. That's how rebirth really happens. Not in one dramatic moment, but in a million mental decisions, made in silence, before the world sees a single result. Part 7, Faith in Action, when prayer becomes a journey. There is a common misconception about faith. People think faith is sitting still and waiting for a miracle. They believe that to trust God means to do nothing, to remain passive, to wait for a divine hand to rearrange their circumstances. But Napoleon Hill shattered that illusion. He made it clear real faith is movement. Real faith is walking before the road appears. Real faith is knocking on doors long after they've been shut. Real faith is praying on your knees and then standing up to build what you believe. Faith is the eternal elixir, Hill wrote, which gives life, power, and action to the impulse of thought. Action. That's the key. If you're not moving, you're not believing. It's easy to say, I believe. It's another thing to act on that belief when your bank account says no, when your body's tired, when the world says you're done. But Hill taught that the universe does not respond to what you say, it responds to what you do. The man who has no one but God is given a test. Will you walk forward, even though everything around you tells you to stay still? Will you act even when you're afraid? Faith is not found in your words, it is proven in your footsteps. Prayer without movement is just fear wearing a mask. Many people pray, few people obey. It's one thing to ask God for direction. It's another thing to actually follow it, especially when it requires risk, discomfort, or total reinvention. Napoleon Hill saw prayer not as a plea, but as a partnership. He believed that the mind, when focused in faith, becomes a receiver of divine instruction. But once instruction is received, the next step is non-negotiable. Act on it. If you feel led to call someone, do it. If you feel prompted to start that business move, if the idea won't leave you alone, start building it. You don't need the full picture. You need enough trust to take the next step. That's where faith becomes transformational, not when it stays in the spiritual, but when it enters the physical. Faith without works is dead, and so is the dream. The Bible says it. Napoleon Hill confirmed it, and life proves it. Faith without works is dead. You can believe all day. You can visualize every night. You can speak affirmations until you lose your voice. But if you don't move, nothing happens. Hill called this applied faith, not theoretical, not passive, applied. He believed that God meets the man in motion. A man who walks in faith, even without results, is 10 times more powerful than the man who waits in fear, even with talent. Why? Because motion multiplies favor, obedience opens unseen doors, and spiritual momentum is built through risk. You build confidence by doing, not hoping. Another trap many fall into is this: they wait until they feel confident to act. But Hill was clear: confidence doesn't come before action. It is the result of action. When a man who has no one but God takes a step forward even while doubting, he proves to himself that he's stronger than fear. That builds trust. That builds momentum. That builds faith. Confidence is not the absence of fear. It's the muscle of obedience. The more you do what you're called to do, the more your faith becomes real and results follow. Do not wait, Hill wrote. The time will never be just right. Start where you stand. That is the mantra of the man who walks with God. Faith transforms you more than your circumstances. Here's a truth Napoleon Hill understood deeply. The greatest miracle isn't what faith brings to you, it's what faith brings out of you. You think you're praying for answers, for money, for help, but what's really happening is that you're being changed. Each time you take action on your belief, you become more disciplined. You become more courageous. You become more aligned. Faith transforms your character before it changes your conditions, and that is why action matters. It's not just about achieving a result, it's about becoming the kind of man who can carry the result without collapsing. When God sees you move, He moves with you. There's a pattern in life: when you take one step in faith, life takes 10 toward you. Napoleon Hill believed this wasn't coincidence. It was divine alignment. When your thoughts are rooted in belief and your actions match your thoughts, you are literally partnering with infinite intelligence. God won't build your dream for you, but He will build it with you if you move. This is why the man who has no one but God is not at a disadvantage. He is at the perfect place to walk by faith, not sight, because nothing is blocking his path, not noise, not opinions, not fear of failure. The road may not be visible, but the direction is felt, and that is enough. Your feet are the proof of your faith. So here's the ultimate question. What are your feet doing? Are you sitting still, hoping life changes? Or are you moving forward, even 1 inch at a time, declaring with each step, I believe? Because real prayer is not finished when you say amen. It begins when you stand up and walk. Hill knew this. That's why his legacy wasn't just words, it was action, built through storms, failures, and silent battles. And now it's your turn. Part 8. Silent persistence, the discipline of the man who walks alone. Success does not arrive with fireworks. It doesn't come dressed in applause. It shows up quietly for the man who did not stop. And that man, more often than not, is walking alone. When you have no one but God, your victories don't come from cheering crowds. They come from silent decisions made daily to keep going even when no one notices, even when nothing seems to be changing. Napoleon Hill called this power persistence, and he warned persistence is to the character of man as carbon is to steel. Without it, nothing in life can be forged. No matter how strong your desire, how clear your vision, or how deep your faith, persistence is the proof of faith. A man can say he believes in his dream. He can write affirmations. He can pray for hours. But if he quits at the first sign of resistance, it was never faith, it was fantasy. Hill believed that persistence is not just action, it is repeated action in the face of contradiction. When people say it won't work and you keep going, when money runs out and you keep building, when doubt screams louder than faith and you show up anyway. That's persistence, and that's the moment when your spiritual training becomes evidence. Hill wrote, "Those who have cultivated the habit of persistence seem to enjoy insurance against failure. Not because they're lucky, not because they're better, but because they simply outlasted those who stopped." The loneliness of quiet work. There is a kind of persistence that no one sees. It's not Instagrammable, it's not flashy, it's not celebrated. It looks like waking up early when you're exhausted, rewriting the business plan after the 5th rejection, studying when no one is watching, praying with no answer in sight and still walking forward. This is the work done in silence, and it's the kind of work that builds unshakable men. When a man has no one but God, he has no audience, and that's where his persistence is forged not for show, but from truth. It becomes a rhythm, a beat inside the soul. Try again. Try again. Try again. Hill saw this clearly. Most men don't fail because they lack intelligence or resources. They fail because they stop too soon. How to cultivate unbreakable persistence. Hill gave us a clear formula for building this habit. He said persistence comes from 1. Definiteness of purpose. Know exactly what you want. 2. Desire fuel the fire daily. 3. Self-reliance. Trust yourself when no one else will. 4. Definiteness of plans. Adjust strategy, but never the goal. Accurate knowledge. Seek truth, not opinion. 6. Cooperation. Align your environment with your mission. 7. Willpower. Push beyond moods and fatigue. 8. Habit. Do it daily until it becomes who you are. None of these require luck. All of them require choice. And the man who has no one but God is in the perfect place to develop them. Why? Because solitude strips distraction. You're not busy entertaining others. You're busy building from within. Why the universe hides results until you're ready. Here's something most men don't understand. The universe often delays your visible results to test your invisible strength. Will you keep showing up when no one claps? Will you keep building when the numbers don't move? Will you keep going when everything says stop? If you do, you grow, not just in your skill, but in your capacity to carry success when it comes. Hill taught that persistence isn't just a means to an end. It is the refining fire that makes you worthy of the end. Because if you quit now, how will you handle pressure later? If you can't endure private failure, how will you carry public recognition? Persistence trains you for the responsibility of victory. It prepares your shoulders for the weight of blessing, Persistence is the silent partnership with God. There's a mystery here. When you persist not in arrogance, but in purpose, you begin to align with divine timing. God rarely blesses the first draft. He blesses the man who stays in the process long enough to grow into what he asked for. That's why Napoleon Hill said, "A quitter never wins and a winner never quits." Your persistence is not annoying God, it's proving to him that you're serious. And in return, he begins to move things behind the scenes, resources, ideas, alignments that only appear when the man keeps walking. Repetition builds rhythm and rhythm builds power. One of the most underrated truths Hill emphasized was this: persistence creates rhythm, and rhythm creates compounding force. Doing one thing once may not matter, but doing one thing every day changes who you are. One page written daily becomes a book. $1 saved daily becomes financial freedom. One act of obedience daily becomes character. And this rhythm, once built, becomes a force stronger than motivation. You no longer ask, "Should I keep going?" You just do, because that's who you've become. And that is the power of silent persistence. You become the man no one can break. Persistence, over time, doesn't just help you achieve goals, it transforms your identity. You become the man who doesn't quit, the man who keeps his word to himself, the man who can be trusted with influence because he didn't need applause to act. When a man has no one but God, he discovers this secret: consistency is louder than talent, than luck, than praise. And one day, after weeks, months, maybe even years, he looks up and realizes he didn't just survive, he rebuilt himself, quietly, powerfully, permanently. Part 9. When a man becomes one with God, the moment of integration. After all the struggle, all the solitude, all the silence and persistence, there comes a sacred shift. It doesn't always come with signs, no lightning, no grand moment of revelation. It arrives like a stillness, a knowing, a quiet alignment. The man who has walked through darkness, obeyed without validation, persisted without praise, and believed without evidence finally reaches a state of inner, unshakable integration. He is no longer seeking God, he is moving with God. Napoleon Hill described this moment as when a man becomes aligned with infinite intelligence, no longer resisting life, but channeling it. This is the moment when he no longer says, "I need help" or "I feel alone." He says, "Wa natan suri," use me. The end of inner conflict. Most men live in constant contradiction. They want success, but fear rejection. They want love, but fear abandonment. They want to lead, but doubt their worth. But through the fire of solitude, the discipline of thought, the action of faith, in the quiet rhythm of persistence, the contradictions dissolve. The man no longer wrestles with himself. He is whole. He is focused. His spirit, mind, and actions move as one. This is integrity, not in moral terms, but in its root meaning to be whole, undivided. And when a man becomes internally whole, his external world begins to align effortlessly. Napoleon Hill would say this is when a man stops trying to get and starts becoming, no longer needing, only serving. When a man reaches this moment, he stops needing validation. He stops craving approval. He stops chasing status. Why? Because he realizes something profound. He is no longer here to prove himself. He is here to fulfill something greater than himself. At this point, he becomes a vessel, not an owner. His ideas, his energy, his resources, his presence, all of it becomes an offering, not to the world's demands, but to a higher purpose. Hill called this definiteness of purpose in its purest form. A man no longer driven by ego, but by divine instruction. And the beautiful paradox is this: the less he needs from the world, the more the world gives him. Because people follow the man who moves from clarity, not desperation. Spiritual maturity from asking to listening to commanding. Napoleon Hill believed in stages of spiritual growth. At first, a man asks. Then, he listens. Eventually, when aligned, he speaks with the authority of the purpose that flows through him. He becomes a man of direction. He no longer floats. He no longer reacts. He builds, moves, and speaks with weight. Not arrogance, but anchored purpose. He doesn't just say, I believe. He says, I know what I must do. And everyone around him feels that certainty, not because of charisma, but because of alignment. This is not the loudest man in the room. Often, it is the quietest. But when he speaks, people listen because he has nothing to prove, only something to deliver. God trusts the man who doesn't need to be seen. Hill often wrote that before life blesses a man, it tests him. But once he passes the test, not just of performance, but of integrity, he becomes trusted. And once God trusts a man, doors open that no man can shut. Opportunities find him. People are drawn to him. Influence increases not because he sought it, but because he is now qualified to carry it. This is the final transformation. The man who once cried out for help becomes the man others turn to for strength. Because he has walked alone, because he has stayed true, because he has surrendered and risen, the fruit of becoming quiet power, quiet impact. This man doesn't need to talk about his vision. He embodies it. He doesn't chase outcomes. He attracts them. He doesn't fight for control. He flows with divine direction. His success may not even look loud. It may not make headlines. But the lives he touches, the peace he carries, and the certainty he walks with, those are miracles in motion. Hill believed this man would eventually become what he called a mastermind in union with infinite intelligence. Not because of education, wealth, or status, but because of surrender, discipline, alignment, and resolve. And that is the highest goal. Not just to succeed, but to become the kind of man God can work through. If you're walking alone right now, understand this: God has not forgotten you. He's forging you. You were never abandoned. You were being aligned. So don't quit. You're not at the end. You're at the edge of purpose.